The Tithe Comes First, by Callum Davis. They are all dead. He cycled through the words over and over again in his head, as he had done for many moons. They are all dead. Leopold was pacing the length of the Hall of Achievement, accompanied by 6 candle-bearing servo skulls. Every scrap of space on its high walls was devoted to framed certificates of fulfilled tithes going back centuries. The documents appeared to move of their own volition in the flickering candlelight, as if the souls of those who wrote them dwelt within. Not once had his family failed in their duties as planetary governors. Grain, promethium, soldiers, piskids, fresh water, all had been supplied on time and in the exact volume required. This place, where he could look upon the memory of their achievements, had always been his refuge, his place of calm. The place that reminded him of his purpose and what truly mattered. The halls stretched further than the eye could see. He stopped to look at one certificate, a document from the Adeptus Astartes Black Templars chapter, confirming that 1,000 aspirants had been yielded from their population, the most genetically and spiritually robust of its sons. He still remembered that day, in his grandmother's reign. He was only 11 at the time, but he recalled every detail. The glorious space marines clad in perfectly polished ebon and ivory armor plate, their weapons and tabards adorned with the imperial cross. The smiles on the faces of the boys selected as they waved to a cheering crowd 1 million in number. I wonder where those boys are now, he thought. What victories have they won? What enemies have they vanquished? To where have they brought the Emperor's light?
I wish they would bring it back to us now,
he said, then heaved a sigh. He couldn't help but wonder if any had been slain in the trials and campaigns they would have been inevitably put through. The idea saddened him, but he knew that if they had perished, it would have been for the Imperium. He felt pride that he and his world had been able to play a small part in that. He walked on before stopping at a portrait. It was of him, painted many years before. Each governor's picture was painted at the start of their reign. Many generations before, it had been painted towards the end, but his great-great-grandmother had put an end to that. She decided that she would look her best for future generations, and she didn't want to die before the work was completed and never be able to see herself on the walls with her ancestors.
So here I am,
he said. He had been an imposing youth, filled with vigor. His hair remained neatly trimmed to Astra Militarum standards, but now was receding and greyed. Wrinkles were now stark around tired eyes. He hadn't smiled in months, not since the stars twisted, but he took some small pride in that his muscle had not yet turned to fat, and that the regal blue ceremonial uniform he wore was the same size, though the regimen required to maintain his physique was somewhat more difficult now than it had felt 27 years before. He read the plaque beneath the image, Leopold XVII, Planetary Governor of Tainara, 972 M41, in the Emperor's name. Each line was progressively bigger than the previous, to emphasize what mattered the most. He looked down the length of the wall at all the tithe certificates of his career. He remembered those times of success with great fondness, though it only made him dread the future. He pictured priests chanting the rites of sealing as produce was put into storage for transport, and servitors counted grains to ensure that each munitorum container held the exact quantity stipulated. He remembered the parades of freshly raised regiments of Astra Militarum, uniforms gleaming, marching in perfect order along the Via Magnifica before his palace, ready to be deployed off-world to protect the Emperor's holy realm. He could still smell the clouds of incense smoke billowing from hundreds of swinging censers borne by the white-clad priests and acolytes who went with the soldiers. He marveled at the thought of all of the mouths fed by Tainara's food, all the vehicles and ships powered by the fuel extracted from her soil, and the thirst quenched by her fresh water.
And now, it's all over,
he said to himself. and began to weep. The family shrine glowed in candlelight, the gold, silver, and platinum decorating the sanctuary alive with the flame's colors. Here Leopold had prayed every morning and every night for his entire life. Before he knelt, he paused to look at the artifacts arrayed around and on it, family heirlooms left by his ancestors over generations. There was a stained glass image of a Black Templar warrior incorporated by his grandmother, a pair of artisan las pistols, detailed gold filigree laid into their grips, a naval cutlass, blade engraved with the names of the ships on which its wielder once served, small vessels of grain, piskids, water, and promethium, the planet's chief exports, skulls of deceased children and faithful servants. All were laid before the image of the throne, in offering and thanks. Leopold had one day hoped that his numerous campaign medals would lay here. They may yet, he thought, taking a knee on the bare stone floor and bowing his head. He prayed,
Lord Emperor, with humility I kneel before you. For shelter and sustenance, I thank you. I am pledged to you, heart and soul and sword, and now I beg that you hear my beseechments. I beg that those who do not share my view be persuaded. I beg for the strength to do what must be done should they not be. God Emperor, we need your light. We need your word.
Leopold knelt in silence for several minutes, desperately hoping for answer. He heard the creak of the door open and the footsteps of military boots. The servo skulls rushed to meet the new arrival, digital weapons clicking into action as their machine spirit's anger was roused. The person stopped.
Lord, I have come, as ordered,
the man said.
Stand down, siblings,
Leopold said. The servo skulls returned to their brother as they reshrouded their weapons. The man knelt next to Leopold. He wore a similar rich blue ceremonial uniform to that of the governor, his chest bedecked with campaign medals. Many matched those Leopold wore. His boots were so well polished, they reflected light like an unspoiled mountain stream. He removed a peaked cap, which he delicately placed on the floor next to him, the badge of his rank displayed on it, facing towards the shrine in deference.
Thank you, Hass,
said Leopold.
I am sorry to say that even decades after our youth, I still need you.
After Phaigon, Leopold, I vowed my loyalty. What would you have me do?
Leopold handed him a sealed roll of parchment. Hass read it silently.
Leopold, the entire council, your daughter.
Only if they cannot be persuaded. Only then. I know, only then. We must maintain order.
What you are proposing
is what is necessary. I have agonized over it since... You know what happened to the stars, what happened to the astropaths. We must manage this ourselves. We will not be able to hear from others outside, if indeed any are even out there. The people's strength hangs in the balance even now. The slightest push could see it broken.
You know that it won't end with this.
I know.
Hass said nothing for several seconds before nodding.
I have loyal soldiers. We can do what is necessary. But please, Leopold, if my service and loyalty have meant anything to you, do everything to make sure they aren't needed.
Leopold squeezed his friend's shoulder.
You have my word, Hass. Before my family's personal shrine to the Emperor. Before my ancestors' eyes.
Governor, Father, the stars themselves have rotted. How can we pretend otherwise? To even glance at it churns the stomach and loosens the bowels,
said Councillor Annika. As representative for the granaries, she wore delicate flax robes and sat in a throne of wicker before a stained glass window depicting a wreath made of wheat overlaying an imperial eagle.
What will we do if the Tithe ships don't come?
Asked Councillor Nella. She sat on a throne of bare steel with skulls embedded into arms that faced the rest of the council chamber. Her grey combat fatigues blended in with her seat. The stained glass behind her depicted a las gun crossed with a chainsword, this too over an imperial eagle, indicating she was responsible for planetary defense. The other councillors nodded in agreement. They represented the Prometheum refineries, Piscid farms, desalination factorums, Astra Militarum, Administratum, and Ministorum. Each had a bespoke throne around the rotunda, with a tall window behind them, representing the organization they belonged to and led. The chamber's floor was a single continuous mosaic, depicting scenes from imperial legend, suffused with imagery and symbols, representing the Imperium, Tenara, and its people. Its walls were lined with braziers, shaped into gargoyles and mythical creatures.
"What will we do if they come to collect?"
added Councillor Sfario of the Administratum in his croaky voice. His long grey beard touched the floor between his feet, and his face was so heavily wrinkled that his eyes were practically obscured.
"Should my colleagues and masters change the tithe, we shall have no way of knowing what the new requirements are."
Leopold rose. His servo skulls were not with him. The council's strict rules forbade weapons or aids in the chamber.
Points well made,
He said.
The star rot presents us with challenges unprecedented. The people are afraid, and with no astropaths, we have no means of ascertaining what has happened to the wider Imperium. We risk failing the tithe. We cannot assume that this has affected any other world. Life must continue as normal. Honored councillors, we know where our tithes go from here. We have many hundreds of transport ships in orbit. Even without communication from the Administratum and Munitorum, we can continue to fulfill what we currently understand to be our requirements. We will have achieved stability for our people and done our duty to the best of our knowledge, given the circumstances.
He sat down. Sfario spoke again.
"I sympathize with your reasoning, Governor, but I fear what you ask is impossible. The Captain's Council tell me that their navigators are badly shaken, those that have survived. They babble warnings of strife and death, few countenance traveling at all."
"These are bad omens, councillors,"
said Tranio of the Astra Militarum.
"Should any of this be truth, sending armed men away from this world would be an exercise in poor judgment, and one that could place this world and her people at immense risk."
This world has not come under attack in centuries,
said Leopold.
Tainaran grenadiers have fought with distinction across the Imperium. If the portents are bad, the Emperor will need them abroad more than ever.
"They are of even less use if there is no more Tainara, Lord,"
said Tranio.
"If they do not arrive, we will be seen as traitors,"
said Leopold.
"Aloysius, what says the Ministorum?"
Leopold hoped that a man of the faith would see things from his point of view. The priest did not speak for several seconds, apparently gathering his thoughts as his eyes darted around, taking in the details of the floor mosaic. "Speak, man," thought Leopold. "You've seen that floor 1,000 times."
"These are dark times indeed, Lord,"
said the soft-spoken priest, each word carefully pronounced as if a lifetime of prayer had rendered normal human conversation a consciously difficult task.
"I find the Emperor's desires almost impossible to determine, though I pray daily to hear his voice. Any course of action requires great risk on all our parts. I can certainly say that our people, while strong in faith as always, grow more concerned with each passing hour. I dare say stability and a return to normalcy is what many seek."
"We are in agreement then. We must—"
"But I must say also,"
continued the priest, as if the governor had not spoken,
"that sending ships full of their sons and resources into the sky befouled will not offer them that either."
"You fool," thought Leopold. "Why is it so hard to see we must continue?" Councillor Arianita represented the Prometheum refineries. A hatchet-faced woman, her robes of office were a modified version of the overalls worn by refinery workers, made to fit, with silver and bronze thread woven in among its fibers. She rose from her throne, which was made entirely from refinery piping.
"It seems we are all in agreement, Governor. Consolidation of resources at this time is most prudent. We can stockpile our tithes and provide them en masse to the Imperium on demand when it is able to contact and reach us."
Leopold stood now, aghast.
If the Imperium returns finding us stockpiling resources and raising militarum regiments that aren't sent off-world, its representatives will think we have rebelled. That is not acceptable.
He remembered again the Black Templars he had seen in his youth, but now he thought of them with fear rather than awe. The discussion went on for many hours. For all his efforts, all his keen mind, learning and dedication to his purpose, Leopold could not sway the council. Nothing could persuade them that they should be doing everything they could to maintain the tithe, despite the circumstances. The closest thing to compromise that could be achieved was to send ships out to find other worlds and explain what had happened to their astropaths and many of their navigators. But that was not enough for Leopold. He knew such efforts would not be deemed sufficient by the wider Imperium upon their inevitable return. The Administratum was not known for its mercy. Not even his daughter would be swayed. With a modicum of support, he might have been able to persuade one or two others and shift the balance of opinion. But that had not happened. Whilst his powers gave him the authority to overrule them, realistically, he could not expect them to follow his plans to the letter without fuss. There would be resistance at every turn. The tithe would still not be met. That could not be allowed. He loathed himself for being too lenient with them over the years, for not reminding them that the authority was his and his alone. He had been weak, and now, when it mattered most, they lacked the faith and willingness to sacrifice what was necessary. And it was all his fault. Leopold thought about his plan, what it would mean, what it would cost. He spent some time in silence, listening to them bicker over minutiae. They had served well for many years, all of them. But they did not see the broader tapestry in all this. They were willfully blind to the damage it would do to their people and the risks it entailed. They all knew the stories of how the previous governorship dynasty failed and how his family had taken over a millennium ago. The Imperium did not forgive failure. The councillors also would not feel the shame that he would. They did not have the ghosts of their ancestors watching as intently from beyond the veil of history. He watched his daughter arguing about long-term grain storage. He was ashamed that he could not sway her, that his failure to do so would result in so terrible a fate. He had failed in teaching her how the sin of disloyalty could seed from what was believed to be good counsel. But he was proud of her eloquence, intelligence, and skillfully made arguments. She would have made a superb governor. The thought was nearly enough to break him. But he knew that the Imperium's punishments would be far worse should the Council's ideas be implemented than what would have to happen now. Agreement is impossible. For the sake of the planet, for the sake of the family, I have no choice. Leopold rose from his seat. The intense discussion ceased almost immediately.
Councillors, I must take my leave for a short break. Continue without me. I shall not be long.
Striding across the mosaicked floor with all the dignity he could muster, he deliberately did not look his daughter in the eye, but he was intercepted by her shortly before he reached the chamber's mahogany doors.
Father, I am sorry to argue against you like this in the council, but I just cannot agree with your plans. I have no desire to undermine you, but I must be honest in my arguments and discussions. It is the way you always taught me to be.
Please, daughter, do not make this any harder, he thought. Leopold felt a lump rise in his throat. He took a deep breath.
Do not apologize. I know you only do your best for our world, and I love you for it.
He paused and forced a weak smile.
I am also sorry.
Without another word, he pulled open the heavy doors that led into the chamber and stepped out, closing them behind him. He could barely hold back his tears. He initiated a miniature Vox device on his wrist.
Hass, it is time. I did my best. I am sorry. They would see us fail. They would see us destroyed. That cannot be allowed.
There was no response for a short while, but Leopold knew that Hass could be trusted.
Yes,
he said finally. Within minutes, he heard the chamber's other entrance open. Desperate regret filled him, but it was too late. He heard the crash of booted feet on the mosaicked floor, the councillors' shouts of outrage, disbelief, and fear. His daughters among them, followed by the harsh crack of lasgun fire. Then there was silence. He slumped against the wall outside, head in his hands and tears streaming out of his eyes.
God, Emperor, forgive me.